welcome to People to People's Through the HR Lens, our comprehensive market update that looks at the leading HR trends impacting the Australian workforce and beyond. I am Leanne Lazarus from the People to People Brisbane team, Recruitment Manager here in the Brisbane office. And on today's edition, we are focusing on how important is leadership development in today's business landscape. This week, we are joined by Keegan Luiters, presenter, facilitator, coach, and trainer, to explore the evolving world of leadership development. From understanding what effective leadership looks like today to designing programs that bridge generational gaps, this conversation unpacks how businesses can elevate their leaders in 2025 and beyond. But first, what are leadership development programs? They're structured initiatives designed to help people grow the skills that they need to lead. Things like decision-making, communication, and strategic thinking. These programs prepare individuals for leadership roles, build stronger teams, and create a pipeline of future leaders across an organization. It is no surprise that in our 2025 Employment and Salary Trends report, 67% of HR leaders across Australia, New Zealand, and the UK listed leadership development as their top priority for the year. Leadership development is also a shared responsibility. It is not just about the individual. It involves their managers, HR, and senior leadership working together. Employees take ownership of their growth. Managers guide and coach them. HR provides the tools, and leaders set the tone for the culture that values development. Today, we are joined by Keegan Luiters, a passionate advocate for leadership, learning, and performance. With experience across government, NGOs, education, and business, Keegan brings a wealth of insight into how leadership development can truly transform teams. He's also the Program Director for the New Leader Development Program at Melbourne Business School and the author of 2 books, Team Up and Teamership. Welcome, Keegan. Thank you for joining us today. Hope you're having a great day so far.
Thank you so much, Leanne. I am. It's beautiful down here where I am, and really looking forward to our conversation. Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. Well, look, I'll be honest. I focus in HR, and a lot of the conversations I've had this year have been around the priorities for HR and the challenges they face. And one of the things that always comes up is around that leadership development program, which I know in past years, traditionally, there were certain industry sectors where we've had a bigger impact or was a bigger focus, but that seems to have spread across multiple industry sectors now, and it's not limited to. And most of the HR generalist roles I tend to recruit, there is a request for that experience and exposure in leadership development programs. So I'd love to pick your brain on a few things. So I have a few questions lined up for us today. So I'm going to start off by saying, can you explain to us what leadership development is, and what are the key criteria that needs to be taken into consideration when preparing a program?
I loved your introduction and speaking about what leadership development is and what it can offer businesses. And I think for me, one of the things that really sticks in my mind is what we're trying to do with leadership development is build the capacity for leaders to function in a network of teams. And that sounds pretty fancy, but it's not just about giving them skills. And I think, skills are such an important part of when we're developing as leaders, but there's also the mindset stuff that we're trying to help leaders see their current and future situations differently. So it's this capacity to be able to function better in a network of teams, which is a really complex environment. And the Centre for Creative Leadership a few years back, maybe I'm not sure exactly how many years back, but they're based in the US, and they came up with a really neat, succinct way of talking about some of their research, but also some of the academic research. And they distilled it into these sort of 3 approaches that people can take in their roles. They can be a dependent conformer, so someone who relies on others and just sort of follows the rules. Then we've got an independent achiever, someone who's very happy to go out and do what they need to do and achieve for themselves. And an interdependent collaborator, so someone who is reliant on other people, who other people rely on, and then collaborate to work and achieve some things. And I think at the crux, what we're trying to do with leadership development is help our leaders become more interdependent collaborators, but also to develop the capacity in others to be interdependent collaborators. Because what that means for businesses and organizations is that as we become more interdependent and collaborative, we have such a big advantage. We can respond to change better. Our organizations are more resilient. almost every strategy that you have is going to rely on collaboration and those networks of teams being interdependent. And so our leaders being able to do that and to role model that behavior and learn about that behavior is so important, and develop those capacities. And I think that one of the things that we see is that it's not enough to just throw skills at people, and we'll talk about this, I'm sure, as we keep going through. It's also helping people make sense of what's required and actually want to do that work and see the value in doing that work, because each of those stages, there's sort of a degree of comfort in being the dependent conformer, the independent achiever. But sort of, so how do we see that? What is the value in doing this, and what does it take for you to sort of make those leaps? And the reason I think, it's so you're seeing these trends where leadership development it's always important across organisations, but as you're sort of saying, it's becoming sort of across sectors, sort of more, you're hearing it more and more and in more roles, is because I think organisations are really starting to realise that those capacities and capabilities are going to be central to functioning, not just now, but where they want to take their organisations. And the need to be able to sort of have those and to build not just leaders, but leadership within an organisation. And what that means, what I'm sort of talking about there, is that we've got individual leaders who are good, but we've also got a network of leaders who can talk to leaders about leadership. And it gets a bit meta, but that context of being able to go, okay, so what's going on for me? Who do I know that might be able to help me here? And how do I have others around here to help me make sense of what's going on and what we need to do? And so that realizing that is that what happens is that your organization gets better at being able to solve problems collectively, and your more senior leaders get to focus more of their energy on the strategic initiatives and looking sort of where they want to take the business, and not just on sort of putting guys out within the business.
Okay. Oh, look, I think that's great. And I think when we're talking across multiple businesses at the moment, a lot of the time people are promoted into leadership roles because of their technical skills. And sometimes that leadership, the soft skills development, is where it comes in. So when you are working with clients, who are the key players in your discussion? And are the expectations in terms of the program, the deliverables, the same?
I think there's often sort of three big groups of, sort of types of stakeholders in the conversation. It will depend, of course, on the organisation and what's going on for them at the time, but there'll be some sort of executive, buy-in. Sometimes that's the CEO, sometimes it's COO, CFO, and the chief people officer, or whatever, people and culture, chief HR officer, whatever they happen to label it as. There's always this kind of sense of, this is why it's important to our business, and there's sort of some executive buy-in at that level. And sometimes it's the whole executive team that have decided this is really important. And that's often driven by a couple of things, understanding like maybe a big strategic shift. We'll go, okay, look, we really do need something different in our organisation, in our teams, and from our leaders. And sometimes it can be driven by growth as well. And so exactly what you're talking about, we are growing so quickly. We've got these people who were great at their previous job. They're into this new role. We've got this gap between their capabilities now and what they're going to be needing now and into the future. And so they've really recognised that. And that's almost like a nice problem to have, that we're growing so quickly. Or it could be also this sort of lived experience of the executives, that they sort of keep having different versions of the same problem landing on their door. And so what we're just sort of like, it's not exactly the same problem, but it's different versions of the same underlying problem that could really be helped. Like they get this sense that I feel like our leaders could be solving more of these problems. I don't feel like these need to be the things that are coming to us. And so we want to develop the capacity of our leaders to be able to respond to that. So there's sort of the executive. And then you've got the chief people officer and their team, who are kind of a bit of a conduit. And so particularly the chief people officer is a conduit. They're on the executive team, and they're also leading the people function within an organisation. And so depending, again, on the size of the organisation, there might be L&D partners, L&D, head of L&D, head of OD that I'm working with, and we're sort of figuring out what does the business need, and what based on your expertise, what are you seeing that you need, and what are some of the kind of ways that you will gauge success here. And so sometimes the execs and the the people professionals will have different measures of success, and we want to be able to sort of line both of those up. Sort of say, okay, cool, there's some sort of direct, we want people to be able to do X, Y, Z, but also there'll be some sort of second order impacts that we hope, what are we thinking about engagement around retention of some of those, and some of the things that are going to be coming as a result of this. This is what we expect. And I don't think anyone who is developing a leadership development program would want to be on the hook for engagement or retention, because it's such a complex system. But you do know that we know that the better our leaders are going, the more we get engaged, high-performing individuals and teams. And so that's absolutely one of the things that the people professionals are looking at. So how do we kind of, quantify that? And then they're also they are advocating on behalf of, this is the experience of our people at the moment. This is what we're hearing. This is what our leaders are going through. And that's the third group, the leaders and the people within the organisation. What are their experiences and what do they want to get out of it? And so leaders are often really sort of craving this sense of I really do want to be able to be supported. They kind of get into this this period of being sort of in over their heads. It's I was really good at that job, and I got promoted into this job, and I'm not really sure exactly what to do. I've kind of all of my training, my experiences kind of meant that I've been good at this job, and as a result, I get put into this new role. And one of my favorite ideas that many people will be familiar with is the 𝗶𝗃 principle, is that, we get promoted to our level of incompetence within an organization. And so we get good at a job, get promoted, get good at that job, get promoted, and then we stay at that job that we're not very good at. And a lot of leaders have that feeling. And when I'm working with people, I'm like, it's okay. Incompetence is not a permanent state, right? We can develop those capacities. And I think it's having that empathy with people, as well as talking to our people professionals and the execs around, these are things that we can develop. There are ways that we can help people to become better leaders, and helping people who are leading in teams and in roles. And often people have been in leadership roles for quite a long time without having any formal sort of training and support around it. And one of the things that they benefit from is kind of just a bit of, okay, cool, just a bit of filling a few of the gaps that they had. Now they've got a name, for some of the things they've already been doing, or they've seen people do, or they've identified something that they could really just add into their existing practices. And so sometimes the experience is actually allowing our leaders to kind of just identify what are the gaps that they're doing, what are they already doing well, and then so that they can move forward with a little bit more confidence around how they want to lead forward and what's going to be required of them to lead.
Marvellous. Now, at the moment, we've got 4 generations in the workforce, and we're starting to see a lot of the younger generation starting to go into those leadership roles. You've also got a lot of experienced leaders that are still in that role. So my question is a little bit twofold, in the sense of how does leadership development, design and delivery need to be considering the multi-generational workforce? And it's both tiers in terms of for those generations going into leadership roles, but also being in those leadership roles, managing various different generations within teams.
It's a great question, because, I was looking at your report. I'm looking over here at my other screen where I've got your report on the screen, and it has so many sort of some relatively, that seems obvious, and some relatively sort of subtle implications for leadership development. And I think that the first thing for when we're developing leaders is making sure that it's context driven. So what I mean by that is as opposed to our leadership development that is content driven. So when we sort of say, okay, in context, a big part of the context is the people that we are trying to develop as leaders. And so some of the things that are in your report, how do people prefer to be trained? How do they prefer to be communicated with? And one of the things that us as leadership development professionals working with multi-generational workforces, we need to develop our flexibility around that. We need to be able to give people multiple doors to the same house is something I'll say quite a lot. It's we're trying to get to the same place, but you might go through the laundry door. I'm going to go through the garage. Someone else might go through the front door, but we're sort of different people based on their preferences, their experience are going to need different things, and are going to sort of try and engage with content in different ways. And when we're trying to develop something, trying to create something for everyone, it can be difficult, but sort of being able to have that flexibility around that, and multi-modes as well. So, one of the things around what are their preferred training methods? Having multi-modes, having face-to-face workshops where you can, having resources that people can access on demand, having individual coaching and mentoring, and sometimes that's peer mentoring and coaching, and sometimes that's in between across levels of experience. What we're trying to really do is help to leverage that multi-generation as a strength of the workforce, and say, okay, so how do our people who are in sort of older generations, what can they add to people who are in newer generations, and vice versa, and how do we build connections between those? So they're all things to consider, and they're kind of principles and practices of good leadership development anyway, but they're particularly useful when we're considering sort of diverse generations.
Okay. Now, I mean, when you talk leadership style, management style, everyone has a natural way that they would lead or they would manage. But with the 4 generational workforce that we have at the moment, there is a requirement to be able to sort of read the room, for a better way of putting it. As you said, people learn in different ways. People will go through different doors to get to the same sort of area. So what are some of the implications for a 4 generational workforce for leaders in terms of how do they lead, how do they manage?
Yeah, I think, again, and this will be another theme of our conversation, it's just putting a higher premium on some of the stuff that's already been really important for leadership. And in particular, what I've got in mind is this idea that behavioural flexibility is a superpower. This ability of a leader to adapt their behaviour based on the context. And part of the context is going to be who they are, what their generation, or maybe not even just their generation, but what are their views of the world, what are things that they think are important, what are their expectations, is part of the context, as well as the people that I'm leading, what are their values, expectations, and preferences. And being able to kind of match those, not always flexing away, so not always giving people what they want. I don't think that's always useful for leaders, because that can be really draining when you're operating away from your values, your preferences, your capabilities all of the time, but also not always expecting others to come and do that, come all the way to your preference. And particularly when there's kind of hierarchy, there's kind of preference of, well, I'm the boss, you can adjust to me. And I think that leaders who have that behavioral flexibility and constantly making those kind of context-driven decisions around what's going to be the best way for me to respond at this point in time, it's really, really useful. And sort of a metaphor that I have, I'm an obsessed golfer, and golf is full of metaphors that you can apply to leadership, and I'm constantly trying to use them. But, so as a golfer, you have 14 clubs in your bag. You're only allowed to carry 14, but and a lot of us have our favorite clubs. We might use the club when it was not really required for the situation. And so you've got to get good at using all of the clubs. That's one of the things you want to do, but you also got to get really good at choosing which club for the situation that's in front of you. And that could be dependent on the wind, the ground, how far you are, all that sort of thing. And as a leader, if you're able to develop a range of different ways that you can operate, but then going, okay, so what are the factors here that might make me choose to ask a question rather than give advice? What are the times when I'll be more directive than facilitative? What are the times when, and there's so many factors in there, and the multi-generational aspect is one of the things that really does kind of amplify that. That's always been the case, but it kind of amplifies that need where, again, referring back to your report, how communication is something we want, but what does that look like for your different team members? So are you comfortable in changing channels for different people, or if that's going to be too efficient, can you at least communicate and say to people, this is why we're using this particular platform for this, because this is going, this is the intent, and explaining your intent around that. So that's one of the things. And I think as a subset of that, one of the big things for leaders is continuing to develop probably 2 things that are really important, always been important, but empathy and curiosity. So this empathy around what you feel may not be what the other person feels, like trying to actually imagine what they feel. It's like not saying, here's what I would feel if I was in that situation. What we're actually trying to do is imagine what they are experiencing and trying to have their perspective. around this. And again, when you look at your report, you think, okay, so what are their expectations? What are their preferences? All those sorts of things. Your preference as a leader may not, and expectations may not be there. So empathy is really important around that. And then this ability to step away from being sort of judgmental and being more curious is really, really helpful around that, and strengthens relationships. And you see the quality and quantity of information that gets exchanged as a result of that. Those two things, the empathy and the curiosity, being really important. And yeah, again, you could say all of these are kind of principles of good leadership anyway, but they're sort of all being amplified by the differences across generations, and then the sort of the extent that there are, so many different generations all working in at the same time.
Now, I agree with you in the sense of, and same as training, leadership is not a blanket approach, and you've got different people in the team with different needs. But it's also challenging for those leaders because they're there in that leadership role. They're there to deliver results. They're there to drive growth. They're there to drive performance. So it's that fine line, or that fine balance between looking at what the expectations are. And those expectations, if you've got a team of, let's just say, a team of data entry operators, they've got to do X amount of work in X amount of time. Now, when it comes to like a generational workforce, and as you say, having empathy and sort of going, if I was in their shoes, what are they feeling? What are they thinking? Sometimes they can also then derail them in the sense of that they become, and I don't know, this is just me, maybe too focused on that and not focused on the outcome, which then obviously impacts the business and them. What are some of the key approaches that leaders can utilize, or that can help them in terms of managing those multi-generational teams in terms of performance versus individual management style or approach?
I love that. It's a great question. It's a great often a tension that comes up in conversation is around like, it's, we don't want people to take their eye off the ball of performance. We're really still, it's really still important that we have, the outcomes that we're striving for. And I think the real key, and again, this is around this capacity and how do we help people with their mindsets, is to say, how do we make sure this is not a trade-off for you? How do we make sure that you don't feel like it's like I'm either, people-focused or performance-focused? Is this idea of how do you, like, if you get it right, these kind of feed each other by having stronger relationships with people and understanding your people better, what motivates them, what they are striving to achieve, what their current capabilities are, what they want to be better at. You can have much better conversations about their performance. You can sort of say, hey, you said that you wanted to be hitting these benchmarks and you're not. These are the things that you said to me that were important to you and you're not. Let's explore what's going on. Is there something that's going on? How do we get there from here? And sort of I've got a master's of business coaching, so I am, I've got a bias towards the approaches and the beliefs behind coaching, but that is, this is the approach you see in a lot of high performance environments. So if you look at, a lot of sporting teams will now talk about this is the stuff that they're actually driving. They're driving, the relationships first, and then the performance kind of comes on the other side of it. Elite sporting teams are not there for the fun of it. They are, they're some of the most intense performance-driven environments that we've got. And I think one of the conversations we want to have with our leaders is it doesn't have to be a trade-off on this. And if we get it right, they actually amplify each other. And so then being able to talk about performance can actually strengthen your relationship as well, and it can become a kind of virtuous cycle. And it moves away from that sort of transactional relationship that you see with people. It's like, well, you're here to do this. And then so that then the job, then we're sort of moving people towards dependent conformer. Sort of like, okay, cool. So, right, I'll do what I need to do to, like, my job is to not get fired. And sort of that will get me over the line. I've done enough to not get fired, as opposed to what's my best possible contribution to this team. It's a huge gap. And a lot of that is mediated by the way that the individual engages with their work. And within that, the leader is a really big and important part of it. I think your concern is valid though, right? That what happens is that if we only prioritize the people's experience and don't factor in the like the work component, and then we just have like a friendship, and we don't have a working relationship. Like they're different situations, and so that like that I was having a coaching call today about someone who was in just new into leadership, and sort of got this kind of buddy to boss thing going on. I've got a mate who I've been working with, and I've just been put into a leadership role, and my advice to him was just like, have the conversation, like talk about how you want to function here, and that these don't have to be mutually exclusive, but this is what's going on at work, and this is what we expect of each other. And it can actually, in many times it strengthens that relationship and gets better performance out of people.
Absolutely. Oh, look, I definitely think it's finding that balance. Talking to a lot of clients in the market, and they're talking about their leadership development program. Some of the challenges are, from a leader's perspective, the expectations from the employees, especially some of the younger generations coming through, that managers need to understand them. Managers have to adapt their approach to their style. I think sometimes also it's a balance where you can't expect a leader who has a natural style to change completely. Yes, adapt, but it's a business relationship. Both parties have to understand that when those tough conversations are being had, sometimes the delivery of it might be a little bit more direct than what you would naturally like, but it's business. But it's also, I suppose, the delivery part comes into that at the same time. But if you have to look at like the clients or the coaching work that you've done and the leadership development programs you've been a part of and supported, what are some of the biggest mistakes that are being made in leadership development programs through that lens of that multi-generational workforce that you're seeing or hearing about more often?
So I think one of the big ideas is something we've already touched on. It's an idea that I've picked up from Ron Heifetz and Marty Linsky at Harvard in one of their books, this idea that the biggest mistake in leadership is trying to solve an adaptive problem with a technical solution. So an adaptive problem is something that requires new skill sets and new mindsets. So it needs us to look at problems in a new way and then develop new capabilities to deliver on that. And a technical solution is there's a best practice already, and we're just trying to fix. All we need to do to give you the ability to do what we already know, to solve the problems we already know about. Is sort of well established. And I think that in leadership development, that's probably the thing that we do a lot, is we try and tell people about the skill sets without factoring in the mindsets. And I think mindsets are really what generational differences are about. Mindsets are, how do we see the world? What are some of the key beliefs? What are the things that inform how we see things? And so if we don't factor in mindsets into our leadership development, we're missing a big opportunity in general, but particularly, again, it's amplifying those generational differences. And a really good example, like people, what do you mean? And I think that feedback is a really good example of this. And so clients will sort of say to me, oh, we need to have more feedback. Like we need better feedback. I was like, great. And the solution the intent is almost always tell them how to give better feedback, give them a framework to give a better feedback. And you can do that. And absolutely there are a bunch of different pretty useful ways to deliver feedback. And yet the thing that's underpinning that is, like, there's a quote from 𝗹𝗲𝗱𝗆 in Harvard Business Review. So there's no such thing as useful feedback from someone you don't trust. And so if the relationship piece, like, you can be technically correct and useless. You can be technically correct about the feedback, but the person doesn't believe you and doesn't know exactly why you're telling them this. And so they just get defensive, they shut down, they don't listen to your feedback anyway. That's not a technical problem. The technical bit of feedback was delivered beautifully, but the mindset, the adaptive challenge is, what is the relationship that you need to have to be able to give feedback there? And so that's a really sort of like an example of, what are we doing wrong? We're sort of trying to go jump straight to the technical solution when it's an adaptive problem. That's one of the things that I think people really struggle with. Another idea that I see a lot is that we don't give enough hope in our leadership. And what I mean, I'm using hope in a really specific way. And it's sort of Charles Snyder and a few others had a paper on hope theory. It's been around for about 35 years. And the components of hope theory, based on hope theory, are goals, pathways, and agency. And so what that means for leadership development is that we absolutely want our leaders to leave with goals, pathways, and agencies, but we want to make those goals really meaningful to each individual, make them personalized. And sometimes what we do is we tell them, this is why you want to be a better leader, and this is what's important. And again, you go back to your report and you think, well, different people want different things, different generations want different things. It's important to them for different reasons. So if we can help the goals be sort of personalized to them, and people go, well, this is why I would like to put more effort into becoming an interdependent collaborator. Pathways, and so giving people, we give prescriptions rather than possibilities, and giving people sort of a range of options that they can then choose from. And so we sort of get very prescriptive. It's kind of, again, this is almost like hoping that people will be dependent conformers or independent achievers, and the agency, the sense where they feel like it's possible. Because, we've all been in development programs and going like, that seems like a great thing. I don't know if I can do it. And so what are we doing? You're like, oh, great. I can see how, Nelson Mandela can be a great leader. I can see how, Jacinda Ardern was a great leader, but like, I don't know how to do that in my world and in my context with what I've got available for me. And so helping people leave with that sense of agency as well, I think is really important. And so that's something that's often running in the back of my mind. Like, we need to be giving hope. And the thing is that we also want our leaders to be giving, like, so much of this is we are role modeling what we think is useful for leaders to be able to do for others. And so by taking this approach of, developing and focusing on hope, Gallup had some research recently. That's the number one thing that team members want from their leaders. They want hope. And so this sense of, as leaders, as leadership development professionals, one of the things we want to do, our primary role, I think, is actually to role model what we think that good leadership can look like. So when we are in a leadership development program with multi-generational workforce, are we role modeling flexibility? Are we role modeling curiosity? Are we role modeling empathy? Are we sort of trying to connect others? Are we trying to bring out the knowledge and wisdom that's already in the room? Or are we trying to be the central point that knows everything? It's like, it's really hard to yell at someone to relax, right? Like, you can't yell at them to relax. If you want someone else to be relaxed, you've got to be relaxed. And if you want others to be moved towards being interdependent collaborators, you've got to be an interdependent collaborator. That's what you need to be doing and role modeling in there. And that becomes a real challenge for a lot of us. And so I think that's cool. I think it's okay. Like, a great way to develop anything is to try and teach it. And so as leadership development professionals, we will hopefully be always learning about leadership and sort of finding our edges. And that helps us to be empathetic with the people that we're working with as well.
Absolutely. Completely agree. Now, I do have a side question for you. You've got 2 books out. One of them is titled Teamership, which is a really unique title. What does it mean, and what should companies know about it?
Thanks. I love teamership as a word and as a book. I love making up words as well, by the way. It's a fun thing to do. And it came in a conversation like this. I was talking to a client of mine about how leadership is so important, and I do think that it is so important. But one of the things that we don't do is talk to people about how to be a good team member. Like, we do leadership, but we don't do teamership. And I sort of just wrote that down, and that ended up becoming this whole book, and I explored it. And this idea of teamership is how do we be a good team member as part of a network of teams? What does it take to be a good team member? And the implications for organizations are pretty significant, I think. That actually the research that I discovered kind of backed up a lot of what my anecdotal experience was, and that's that 95% of people in knowledge working roles are on multiple teams. And so that, I'd be working with a senior leadership team, and at some point I'd be saying, do you actually think this is a team? This leadership team's a team? Or is it some sort of reporting function and your real team is the finance team or the HR team or the marketing team? And the answer, of course, is that those are both the teams for all of those members, as well as the teams, the projects that they're leading, as well as the steering committees that they're on. And you realise, I've done this with a CFO, and she just sort of ran out of paper with one of the exercises. She was identified 13 teams that she was on at any given time. And so this ability for individuals to operate across multiple teams is really, really important. And another really interesting point is that 75% of teams are not on the org chart. So we can't just rely on looking at the org chart around these are the teams. And so we actually need leadership capabilities across the organisation, not just in formal leadership roles. We need people to be able to move and shift. And this is where our formal leaders want to be able to keep on developing this ability to be interdependent collaborators, so that all of the teams that exist in your organisation have a chance of being better, and people can turn up in each of the teams that they're in as they need to. And then as I was digging deeper, it's like you just sort of see how this idea of being able to operate as a network of teams keeps being connected to things that organisations want. All of the things organisations want: to be resilient, to be learning, to have better culture. All of these things can be connected to, if you get that sort of idea of teamership right. The more people you have sort of answering two questions with yes, and so like, am I bringing my best? And am I supporting others to bring out their best? The more people are saying, yep, I'm doing that, then you have more and more of these positive behaviours that lead to positive outcomes for people. So I'm really passionate about the idea of teamership and the role of leaders in that as well. It's not, I think one of the things people sort of think is like, oh, does that mean you don't need leaders? I think not at all. I think leadership is one of the key elements of having teamership exist, but it's different to just, being hierarchically driven leadership.
Fantastic. Well, Keegan, thank you so much for joining us, for sharing your knowledge, your insights, and your experience with us. Do love the whole teamership concept. And obviously you have your website, you have your books. Is there another book in store coming up?
There might be. It won't be anytime soon, but I really would like to write a few more. Yeah. Good.
Well, thank you very much for your time. If anyone wants to reach out to Keegan, do so either on LinkedIn or via his website. If you're looking for some coaching or if you're looking for some leadership development, reach out and have a chat to him and see how you can help. But thank you very much for joining us today, Keegan.
Thanks so much, Leanne.
If you're looking to grow your HR career or build your team, we're here to help. Whether you're searching for your next opportunity or need the right talent for your business, our teams across Australia, New Zealand, and UK have you covered. With over 10 offices, we can connect you with the right opportunities to set you up for success in 2025 and beyond. Thank you for joining us for today's edition. This episode of a People-to-People HR Lens, and to our guests today for the discussion. We hope to see you next time. Thank you and have a great day.